What's going on, guys? Today we are working on Rhonda the Honda again, and we are installing the wideband and the boost gauge. We're working on my aftermarket wiring right now. I have so much in here that it's insane. I kind of pulled a lot out for the meantime. So what we have down here is we have my under dash lights right there that I unplugged and moved kind of to the side. We have my fog light harness, which I have cut and shortened. This wire was really long. It came out like out the door, and I just had it all zip tied. I had a lot of extra wire just like bundled up and zip tied that I'm going to be cutting and shortening. So we cut this wire and shortened it, and then we have this right here, which is the plug for the fog lights, which we also cut and shortened it because this went way too far. It needs to be able to come out a little bit, but not really all that much. That should be good now. And now we also have my gauge for my air ride, which comes up in here. I'm not going to be cutting this wire. I'm just going to be bundling it up just in case someone ever needed to use it in a different car, or I move the air ride to a different car or something like that. We have our gauge wiring right here that needs a plug in. I'm not cutting these. I just bundled that one up, and the rest are the right length. These are the controllers for that, as well as the lights underneath the dash. All that's going to be kind of wrapped up. This is just to silence it. It made a loud, like, high-pitched noise, so I just wrapped it in that to silence it. But all that stuff's going to be shortened, and some of it might be bundled up. But all of that's going to sit up here in this area and nowhere else. And then this is my radar detector wiring. Same thing. This I don't really want to cut. It's going to be bundled up, but right behind up here, so it's going to be out of the way of everything. And then we are going to have the boost gauge and air fuel ratio gauge up here. I have a different trim piece that goes in here, and the wiring for those, actually all of this stuff, rather than being wired straight to the fuse box, it's going to have its own fuse block right here in the side. So like the wiring from the fuse box is going to come up here, and it's going to be really tidy. And then we're going to have a fuse box right here, and then that's going to go to all the gauges and everything else. So I need a constant 12 volt source for the gauges. For some reason they need one rather than just a remote 12 volt. They need that too, and a dimmer switch. But the constant 12 volt source, there's a really thick white cable plugged into the fuse box here that goes up into the steering column. I'm going to tap into it up here because I'll have more room to do so. So we're just going to take this out, and we're going to tap a 12 gauge wire onto it and bring it to the fuse box for any devices that need full 12 volt source at all times. Right now it's just those two gauges. And then we're also going to bring one from the fuse box up here for a remote 12 volt, and then also from the fuse box for the dimmer for the lights. So that will be the remote switch turn on for these gauges, as well as the lights underneath the dash. And yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and get started now. Alright, so I pulled apart underneath the ignition here. You can see I already spliced into this wire right here for the air ride, because the air ride needs to be on while the car is cranking, so that's why we splice into that one. And then here's the constant 12 volt. I'm gonna cut this, put a splice on it just like that, and run a 12 gauge wire out and around over to my fuse box right here for a constant 12 volt. Alright, so I got this spliced in now, and what this is going to do is going to run along these wires up to the top of the fuse box. I'm going to have it wrapped in there, and then it's going to run with the wires from the fuse box over to this fuse box that I'm going to have here. Alright, so now, as you can see, the fuse box is actually exposed. I can plug stuff into it, and we have coming through up from the fuse box, we have my radar detector wiring. Here's the fuse for it. It goes up here, and all the wiring is bundled behind this switch, so it's out of the way now. We're going to be pulling this along to the side as well. We have our constant 12 volt power right here, and then we have the fog light plug wiring right here, which is also going to come up here, but then this will be kind of in the way a little bit. I didn't want to cut too much out of it so that I had play to pull it out of here, but it should be good. And we just have to run one more wire from the fuse box for the light power, for stuff to turn on with the lights. So we're adding the wiring for the light, and I'm using a 10 amp fuse because I'm going to have a couple more fuses off of this. This is going to power all the gauges and the lights underneath the dash, and two of the gauges are just using this for remote wire, so those are going to have a small fuse on them, and then the other ones are going to have like a 5 amp or a 7.5. Alright, so you can't really see too much, but I got the wires coming up from down there. They're all out of the way. Get to the fuse box now. And then we have this second fuse box right here. I have all the fuses in it. In the bottom, we have constant 12 volt, then we have switch 12 volt. These are both for the gauges, and then dimming, which is also for the gauges. So we have 3 fuses just for the air-fuel ratio gauge and the boost gauge. And then the next one is the lights, the back light for the gauges, as well as these lights are going to be hooked up there. And then the top one is a completely separate circuit just for the wideband, the LC-2. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this in the other garage and continue working on it. We have the O2 sensor. We pulled that out. It was kind of stuck. I had a handful of non-foulers on that to keep it away from the exhaust. We have the 90 right here, and then 2 non-foulers. There's the O2 sensor. I took all that out. The wideband's going to go right in. Over here, there's a rubber plug. I'm going to pop that out. We're going to run the vacuum line and the wideband wires through that rubber plug right there. Also for the vacuum for the boost gauge, if you remember from last time, I just plugged that cruise control line down there because I don't have cruise control. I'm going to pull that off, and that's where I'm going to run the vacuum line. So I'm looking at these gauges in here right now, and unfortunately, the brackets that they give you, I think, are for like pillar gauges or something. There's nowhere to hook these up to keep them in. I mean, I suppose they could just sit there like that, but I think I'm going to fire up the hot glue gun and just put a little dab of hot glue on the back of each one to hold it into place so it's not sliding around and spinning. Alright guys, we're quickly making progress here. So I have the vacuum line down there hooked up to the intake manifold. Just took me a second. And the vacuum line and the wideband plug right here, and the vacuum line are both going through that hole right now. I'm going to cut this grommet and stick it back in there to kind of protect them from messing up the sides, and then we'll get back to the inside. Alright, so I've just been kind of chugging away, and I forgot that I was recording a video. So we have the gauges in. I had to drill out some plastic on that side to get that boost gauge to fit in there because it's kind of deep. But this one, the wideband fit in there really easily, and they're plugged in. The wires come down here, and you can see this black one's for the wideband gauge, and it's got the ignition power. Well, you can't really see that well. The ignition power and the dimmer both tied in with the boost gauge. So you can see the brown and yellow one together there plugged into the fuse box are the dimmer, and then below that are the 2 red wires. Those are switch 12 volt, and then below that is yellow, which is solid 12 volt. That's just for the boost gauge. And then right up here we have the white wire that's going to feed the wideband symbol, and that's going to run to the LC-2 over here in the glove box. That's getting grounded in the glove box. There's going to be power and the boost, or power and the wideband signal wire run to that glove box to here. And then over here, you can see I have my grounds grounded on the outside there. It's actually a really clean setup. And just a little bit, I'm going to start zip tying these wires up. But you can see now, like I said before, you can access the fuse box. So I'm pretty excited. Okay, so the wideband is all wired up now. You can see we got it plugged in there. We have the white wire, the red wire is behind the glove box, and then it's grounded up there, which should be perfect. And then we got the plug coming down here. This is going to go to the wideband, which is all this stuff right here, and that's going to go to the sensor. And now we're ready to calibrate this thing. Alright, so it's all calibrated now. I just had to turn it on without the sensor, and then once it gets the air, just turn it off, turn it on with the sensor, and then it calibrates. So it's all calibrated, and I'll show you guys. I cleaned up the wiring a little bit here. I just need to kind of zip tie these together. But everything else is pretty clean. Turn the key forward just 1 notch. Make sure I turn off my music. Okay, perfect. So we got, that's flashing right there. It reads 7.5. There's the boost gauge right there. Looks like it's flickering on the camera, but it's not actually flickering. So we'll give that, it takes about 30 seconds to warm up. There, now it's warmed up, and you can see it shows 22.4 right there. So now I got to go ahead and install the sensor in the exhaust. Alright, I got the wideband threaded in here now, and that thing is scary close to that boot right there. It's like within 3 millimeters. So I zip tied the wire this direction away to kind of pull the top of the sensor away from the boot there. Alright, so we're waiting for that to heat up now. We're going to see how bad my air-fuel ratio actually is with this really crappy tune. I'm assuming it's probably rich, but we are gonna find out. Oh, there's no way that's right. Wow. I hope that's not right. I'm gonna take it for a test drive and see what happens. What's up, guys? It's been about 36 hours since I installed the wideband, and a lot has happened since then. So, as you saw, it was idling really, really lean. It was showing like 20-to-1 air-fuel ratio, which is like, the car wouldn't even be running if it was actually running, getting that. But I took it for a drive, and it showed accurate under load. So I brought it back, and then it was idling around like 16.5, which actually might be right. I had a problem with that tune where the idle was really lean. When the car first started up, you try to drive down the street and it was hesitating and stuff. And then once the car warmed up, it would run okay. So I think, you know, maybe it was actually running really lean, not 20-to-1, but really lean. So I flashed a different tune to it, and it's doing the same thing. It's fluctuating between like 18.5 and 20.5 at idle. So under load, that tune is actually running a little lean too. It's supposed to be a good gas mileage tune for a D16Y7, so it's supposed to run a little lean, but it's, I think, a little more lean than it should be. And that calls for 240cc injectors, and people were saying the stock D16Y7 injectors were 240cc. Some are saying they're not, to use a Y8 injectors. So it's running a little lean under load, so I'm gonna swap the injectors. The lean at idle could be from a few things. It could just be that the wideband is too far from the motor. It could also be because it's near an exhaust leak, or there's an exhaust leak upstream from it. So I'm gonna replace the exhaust manifold gasket, and I'm gonna replace the donut gasket underneath as well. That's like right past the wideband, but I think there's a pretty bad leak there, so that could be causing the problem. If it's still reading inaccurate at idle, I'm just gonna move it up to the where the upstream O2 sensor is. It's only in one bank. It's in the 4th cylinder, but that should give me a more accurate reading. That way I can dial in my idle, and then I can move it back if I need to, because it calculates fine under load, and I can compare the two locations and things like that. So we're just gonna go ahead and mess around with it. I'm gonna swap the injectors first to get the Y8 injectors in there. I'm gonna clean them first. I'm not gonna show how I'm gonna do that. It's kind of a pain to set up and do everything, so I'm just gonna do it quickly. If you wanna see how I clean the injectors, check out my video. I think it's titled "It Wasn't the Injectors." I completely go through how I clean them. It's a kind of involved but simple process. But I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and then I'll show you guys me putting the injectors in. So I got the injectors clean. One thing that I figured out is I had some of this wiring wrong down here. I fixed all of it, except for one thing. So these at the top right there, one of them where you can see the red wire is plugged in, that's on when the key is in the run position. The yellow wire is on when the key is in accessory. The brown wire is on when the lights are on, and then the one next to it is on all the time. So that's what I need to tap into. This, I tapped into this. This is a cigarette lighter. So the yellow wire is actually the wideband. It's on its own circuit. Then this is for the gauge. The gauge is lighting up. And this is not constant 12 volt, this white wire with the black on it. I thought it was, but I was mistaken. So I'm gonna cut this red wire that I wired to it, and I'm going to wire it up there to the fuse box, and that should fix all my wiring issues. Alright, so power went out in here for a second. It's raining really bad out there. But I fixed my wiring, so the gauge has 12 volts to it now at all times, just to keep the presets. And I pulled the fuel pump fuse. We're going to crank it to depressurize the fuel system. Alright, we're going to go ahead and swap out those injectors now. So my time lapse cut me off, but these are the new injectors in here, and they are all installed. This one's not. Oh yeah, that one's in right too. Okay, cool. So yeah, now we're gonna go see if this made a difference at the idle at all. Alright, so you can see it's a little bit of a high idle because it's cold start, but this is with the new injectors, and it's running 15.4. at cold start, which is probably right. It might lean out a little bit once the idle cools down or once the car warms up, but that's probably reading pretty accurately. Alright, so I looked underneath, there was no leak, so I'm not changing out the exhaust donut gasket. That's going to stay on there, but if you look here, you can see it's a little black around there, a little black over here. It is leaking a little bit, which will affect your air-fuel ratio reading. So I'm going to pull this off and put a new exhaust gasket on here. Alright, so you can see it was definitely the tune and the exhaust leak that was causing the problem. Oh, that's definitely a cop. I'm going to put the phone down for a second. So we're going to do a little pull just so you can see the values I'm getting now. So it goes into the 11s at full throttle. And it's pulling way harder. It's definitely running really good. So I think the wideband is definitely fine, and I think we're ready to put the bigger injectors in. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and peace out.